The one who waited. The fog had already begun to rise when I stepped barefoot onto the dock. It was the same every morning, thin ribbons of mist curling off the surface of the lake like something alive, brushing against my ankles as if to ask, "Are you sure you want to come back?" But I did. Every day, without fail. Because he was always waiting. The planks of the dock were slick with dew, creaking faintly under my weight. I pulled the sleeves of my sweater over my hands and looked out at the water. It was still. So still it looked like glass. A mirror to the pale gray sky above. And there he was. Perched at the edge of the lily pads, right where the dock ended, a frog, no bigger than my palm, his dark eyes fixed on mine like he'd been expecting me. I didn't know when it started. Not exactly. But he'd been coming for weeks now. Every morning, without fail. The same frog. The same silence. The same stare that made the world fall away. I crouched down, careful not to startle him. "Hi," I whispered. He didn't move. I dipped my hand into the water, just enough to ripple the surface. He blinked, slow and deliberate. I watched him as I always did, trying to make sense of the strange weight he carried in his gaze. It wasn't human. It wasn't even animal. It was something older than that. Something that didn't belong in this world. But here he was. And somehow, I always felt like he was waiting for me to understand something I hadn't yet remembered. Behind me, the cabin door creaked in the wind. I'd left it open again. I didn't care. It was empty now. Just wood and dust and the echo of conversations that had ended too abruptly. They said the lake had healing properties. That people came to rest and find themselves. But I hadn't come here to be healed. I'd come to forget. And yet, I remembered more every time I looked into those eyes. "I don't sleep much anymore," I told him, hugging my knees. "I keep waking up from dreams I can't remember. I think you're in them." The frog blinked again. A slow inhale. A long silence. "I know how that sounds," I added, half smiling. I didn't expect an answer. Not really. But sometimes I felt like he heard me anyway. The lake was quiet today. Not silent, quiet. The kind of quiet that holds things. The kind that doesn't rush to fill space but waits. Patient. Listening. Like him. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the necklace. It was simple, a bit of green glass wrapped in copper wire, her favorite color. I ran my thumb over the surface until it warmed beneath my skin. "She used to sit right here," I said, staring out at the lilies. "She said the lake made her feel like she could disappear and still be held." The frog shifted, just a fraction. "But enough." "I think you know her," I said. "Don't you?" Of course, there was no answer. But deep inside me, something flickered. I stood slowly and walked to the edge of the dock, feet resting on the final board. I looked down. The water was darker here. Bottomless, as if it stretched forever downward into something I couldn't name. "I'm not ready," I whispered. But I came anyway. A soft splash echoed through the mist, and when I looked again, the frog was gone. Vanished without a ripple. I knelt down, heart pounding harder than it should. There was nothing. Just lilies. Stillness. Reflection. And then, just as I began to lean back, a single air bubble rose to the surface and popped. I stayed there for minutes. Maybe longer. Watching. Waiting. He didn't return. I whispered into the fog, "Will you come back tomorrow?" No answer. But the silence around me shifted, like the whole lake had exhaled. I stood, the necklace clenched in my fist, and walked back to the cabin. My steps felt heavier than when I came. The air carried a new kind of weight. Not grief. Not fear. Something like a question. One I couldn't yet translate. Inside, the cabin was dim and humming with quiet. I passed the bookshelf where she'd left her journals, the record player we never used, the broken clock still frozen at 2:17. I paused in the doorway, staring at the chair she used to curl up in, always barefoot, always with a cup of something hot and an unread book in her lap. The frog had her eyes. Not literally. Not exactly. But something in the gaze. In the weight of it. I dropped the necklace into the ceramic bowl by the door and sat down cross-legged on the floor. "I'm still here," I said into the stillness. No one answered. But I had the feeling something was listening. The ripple that stayed. The next morning, I found him already waiting. He sat precisely where he always did, at the edge of the lilies, on a flat stone just above the waterline. As if nothing had changed. As if he hadn't vanished into the depths yesterday, leaving only silence behind. But something had changed. I could feel it. The moment I stepped onto the dock, my breath caught. The lake wasn't still. A faint ripple moved outward from where the frog sat, circling gently like it was caught in a breathless current. Not wind. Not fish. Just movement without origin. I stepped forward carefully, crouching down. "You came back." The frog blinked, slowly. "I thought maybe you wouldn't. I thought maybe, that was it. That I'd imagined the whole thing." He blinked again. I studied him, more intently this time. He was small, delicate even, but there was an ancient quality to his stillness. His skin shimmered faintly, like wet stone, and his throat pulsed with life just beneath the surface. I extended my hand again. This time, he moved. Not away. Forward. One slow hop. I froze. He didn't come all the way to me, just closer. But enough to close the distance of yesterday's silence. "I don't understand what you are," I said. "But I don't think I need to." The ripple on the water faded. The lake stilled. "I want to tell you something," I said, eyes never leaving his. "Something I haven't said out loud." I sat back, cross-legged on the dock, and uncurled my fingers from the necklace I hadn't even realized I'd brought. "I wasn't with her," I whispered. "When it happened." The fog hung low, muffling the words like it was protecting them. "She went swimming. Alone. She always did that," said it cleared her thoughts. "And I stayed inside. I was tired. I told her I'd join her later. Just, later." My voice cracked. The frog didn't move. When I finally went out, she was gone. They never found her. Just the towel she left on the dock. The frog stared. I felt the weight press into my chest again, the familiar ache of it, not sharp anymore, just ever present. Like gravity. I dream about her sometimes. But I never see her face. Just the water. Just the lake. Just the sound of my own voice calling her name. A long silence followed. The frog blinked once. And then, impossibly, he sang. It wasn't a song like you'd expect. Not words. Not even melody. Just a low, resonant hum, deep and soft and full of vibration. It seemed to echo not in my ears, but in my bones. Like the lake itself had sighed through him. I didn't move. Couldn't move. He stopped after only a few seconds. But it felt like something had shifted again. Like the mist had pulled back just slightly, letting light in. "What was that?" I breathed. He didn't answer, of course. He just turned slowly, elegantly, and hopped once more, back toward the lilies. I didn't follow. But I felt something loosen in my chest. Something small and vital and long-trapped. Later that afternoon, I walked the shoreline. The sky was pale, streaked with thin clouds. I passed the weathered bench she used to sit on, the one where she once sketched the lake for hours, never satisfied with how it looked on paper. I stopped beside it, brushing snowflakes off the seat. I sat. Closed my eyes. Listened. The wind rustled the reeds. The lake murmured. And somewhere far off, a low, familiar hum echoed just once and then vanished. I opened my eyes, heart pounding. A memory surfaced. Not clear. Not sharp. But real. She'd told me once, years ago, that she used to talk to the frogs. She said they remembered things. That they were older than the water. That if you listened close enough, they might hum the truth back to you. I'd laughed then. Now I wasn't so sure. That night, I lit the lantern on the dock. The old glass glowed amber against the fog, casting ripples of light across the surface. I sat beside it, sweater wrapped tight, fingers curled around the necklace. And I waited. Minutes passed. Then an hour. I was about to go back inside when I heard it again, the hum. Softer now. Fainter. I looked up. He was there again. Closer this time. Right at the edge of the dock. The lantern's glow shimmered across his skin. I didn't speak. I just watched. And for the first time I thought I understood something. Not everything. But enough. The shore between us. The frost came thick that night, leaving behind a crystal crust that cracked beneath my boots the next morning. The lake shimmered silver, like the whole surface had turned to glass, except for a single dark patch near the lilies where the water remained open. Where he always waited. I hurried down to the dock, breath fogging the air in front of me. The sun hadn't quite risen, but the sky was lifting, soft blue stretching across the horizon, pulling pale light behind it. He was already there. Perched on the same flat stone, facing me. Watching. I knelt slowly, knees pressing into the cold wood, and opened my hand to show him what I had brought. A small sketchbook. Not hers. Mine. The pages were mostly blank, except for a few stray pencil lines from nights I couldn't sleep. I turned it toward him and showed him the page I had drawn the night before, the edge of the dock, the lilies, and a tiny frog, rendered in light, cautious lines. "It's not very good," I murmured. He blinked. Once. I set the sketchbook down beside me and crossed my arms over the dock rail. For a long time I just looked at him. "You don't move like other frogs," I said softly. "And you don't feel like other frogs. You don't feel like anything I've ever known." He made a quiet sound in the back of his throat. Not quite a croak. Almost, breath. "Do you remember her?" I asked. The wind rustled the cattails. She believed in strange things. I think that's why the lake loved her. Another blink. Another long moment. I didn't, I admitted. Not until you. There was a pause in the world. A pause so long and heavy, I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. The wind stilled. Even the mist seemed to hold its breath. Then the frog hopped forward. Just once. But it was enough. He landed near the edge of the dock, only inches from my hand. I didn't move. I didn't dare. His eyes met mine. And for the briefest moment, something shifted. Not around me, in me. A vision. Not sharp. More like a memory held underwater, glimpsed through ripples. Her laughter, drifting like birdsong through the mist. The weight of her hand on my shoulder. The sound of her bare feet slapping the dock as she ran toward the edge. I gasped. And just like that, it was gone. The frog remained, unmoving. His eyes calm. Unblinking. I touched my fingers to the dock beside him, not to reach, but to stay. "Is this what she meant?" I whispered. "When she said some things live in the in-between?" He didn't move. But I could feel the answer in the quiet. Yes. Later that afternoon, I wandered deeper into the woods behind the cabin. The snow hadn't fallen yet, but the ground was hard, and the air sharp with that aching stillness that comes before winter truly arrives. I found her old trail, worn and overgrown, and followed it until it opened into a small clearing. I hadn't been here since before. The fire pit still held a ring of blackened stones. A few fallen branches. Some forgotten bits of string tied to trees, marking old games we used to play. I stood in the middle and slowly turned in a circle. Everything looked the same. But I had changed. I sat on the log she used to call her thinking throne and stared at the trees, sketchbook on my lap. This time I didn't draw the frog. I drew her. From memory. From feeling. Her hair windblown, her eyes squinting from sunlight, her mouth curled in that uneven smile she got when she knew something I didn't. I finished the last line just as snowflakes began to fall, light and slow, like dust from the sky. And I smiled. That evening, I lit the lantern again. He didn't come right away. I waited longer. An hour passed. The lake grew darker. And still I waited. I whispered to the night. To the reeds. To the lilies. Please. And then, he came. But this time, he didn't stop at the edge. He hopped up onto the dock. Cautiously. One careful leap after another. And then he sat beside me. I didn't reach for him. I didn't speak. I just sat there. And for the first time, I didn't feel like the only person left in the world. We watched the stars rise over the lake together. The mist thinned, revealing a sky so full of light, it made my breath catch. And in that silence, something bloomed. Not joy. Not yet. But something like belonging. The wind came from the north that morning, bringing with it the scent of pine, frozen soil, and something older still, something that stirred beneath the waterline, where the lilies rooted in darkness. I woke before the light broke. There had been another dream. Not one I could remember completely, but the feeling clung to my chest like wet cloth. I remembered running barefoot, the sound of water slapping against wood, and someone calling my name, not harshly, but gently, like a hand brushing hair behind an ear. And then, the hum. That low, resonant hum that seemed to follow me even after I opened my eyes. When I stepped outside, the air was sharp. Not biting, not cruel, just clean. It filled my lungs with something like alertness, and for the first time in weeks, I realized my hands weren't trembling. The dock was stiff with frost, and I walked slowly across it, each footstep creaking with soft defiance. And there he was. Already waiting. The frog. He sat not on the usual stone, but on the dock itself this time, just beside the lantern post, where a few dry leaves had gathered. His body was still as sculpture, but his eyes watched me with the patience of someone who had known how to wait far longer than I'd been alive. "Good morning," I said, surprised to hear my own voice so clear in the cold. I sat cross-legged a few feet away and placed my palms on the wood. There was a time, I began, when I didn't believe in anything I couldn't see or touch. The frog didn't move. He never did, unless it mattered. But I saw something yesterday. And not just the memory. Not just the feeling. I paused. It's you. You're not just here. You're part of something. My voice wavered a little, but I kept speaking. You hold pieces of her. The way you tilt your head when I speak. The stillness. The humming. A gust of wind swept across the lake, rustling the reeds and shaking frost from the trees. The frog's throat swelled and sank in a slow rhythm, like a silent agreement. I leaned forward. Who are you? The question hung there. And then, impossibly, he turned. Slowly, deliberately, he turned and hopped toward the edge of the dock. He stopped, glanced over his shoulder, and waited. Are you? I rose to my feet. You want me to follow? He didn't move again. But that stillness said yes. I followed. We moved like that, me walking, him hopping, in silence, down the side path beside the dock, past the overgrown garden where the thyme and lavender lay withered beneath the frost. The trail curved through the birches, branches whispering overhead, until we reached a place I hadn't visited since summer. The old boathouse. It stood leaning, half sunk into the hill, roof speckled with moss and shingles missing in patches. The door groaned when I pushed it open, the scent of cedar and mold washing over me like breath from another life. The frog hopped inside. I hesitated at the threshold. It felt wrong. Sacred. A place touched by memory. Then I stepped in. Inside, dust hung in the air like suspended snow. Cobwebs stretched between the beams, catching morning light in delicate, trembling threads. And on the far wall, behind the shelves of paint cans and old ropes, I saw it. The mural. Faded, worn, nearly lost to time, but still visible. She had painted it 2 summers ago. The lake's dream, she called it. A strange, twisting pattern of water and stars, frogs and lilies and long fingers of light reaching up from the depths. It had made no sense to me then. But now I felt something clench in my throat. She knew, I whispered, reaching out to trace one of the lilies. She always knew there was something else. Something I wasn't ready to see. The frog sat still in the center of the floor, facing the mural. I sank down beside him. She said the lake spoke in symbols, I said quietly. That it didn't tell stories the way we do. It showed them. Through ripples. Reflections. Dreams. A silence passed between us, the kind that felt deeper than words. I reached into my coat and pulled out the last page of her sketchbook. I'd brought it without thinking. Her handwriting was scrawled in the margin, looped and crooked. Not all disappearances are losses. Some are transformations. I looked at the frog. Is that what happened to her? A breeze rustled the broken boards. He blinked. Then, softly, sang. That low, earthy hum filled the room again, curling around the mural like smoke, like fog, like water over stones. And for a brief, breathtaking moment, I felt her. Not like before. Not memory. Not grief. Presence. I didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, I smiled. Because something inside me knew. She hadn't vanished. She'd simply changed. And I was finally beginning to understand. When the water speaks. The wind shifted on the 5th morning. It no longer whispered. It called. It swept through the trees with a breathless urgency, stirring the branches like nervous fingers, and it pushed me out of the cabin before the sun had risen, before the frost could even settle. I didn't fight it. My coat was already on. My boots, half-laced, hit the ground in rhythm with my heartbeat, fast, unsure, expectant. Something was about to change. I felt it in my throat, in the soles of my feet, in the pages of the sketchbook that had fluttered open in the night without any wind. The lake was no longer still. As I stepped onto the dock, the mist didn't drift quietly as before, it pulled, like the breath between waves, like the world itself was drawing in. And he was there. Not at the edge, not on the lily pads. He was on the dock. Centered. Waiting. The frog. I approached slowly, hands in my pockets, breath fogging the air. You want to show me something, I said, though I wasn't asking. Don't you? The frog blinked. Once. Then he turned and leapt off the dock into the water. I gasped, instinctively reaching forward, but the water didn't ripple like it should have. It accepted him. Quietly. Completely. And then I oved toward me. It lapped at the edge of the dock, and something shimmered across it, like memory woven into water. I saw her. Not as she was before. Not only in body. But in essence. She stood on the dock, barefoot and laughing, eyes bright with a knowing I hadn't understood. Then she was swimming, her body slicing through the water like it was home. Then sketching. Then humming. Always humming. And then, she turned. She looked at me. It wasn't imagination. It wasn't hope. She saw me. And her smile said everything. I covered my mouth with my hands, choking on the sound that broke from me, not sobbing. Something quieter. Something older. Grief and relief tangled together in the shape of breath. The light began to fade. I stood, heart pounding. No, please, wait. But it was already receding. The image dissolved. The glow disappeared. And the lake stilled again. I stared at the surface for what felt like hours, the wind swirling around me. But I didn't cry this time. I couldn't. What I'd just seen, what I'd felt, was too big for tears. She was here. Not as a ghost. Not trapped. Transformed. Just as she'd written. That afternoon, I packed. Not because I was running. But because I was ready. I didn't know where I'd go next. The idea of staying terrified me now, not because it was lonely, but because it was complete. This lake, this cabin, this strange and beautiful presence, it had done what it came to do. It had given me back something I thought I'd lost. Myself. I sat on the floor of the cabin one last time, sketchbook in my lap, and drew. Not her. Not the frog. Not even the lake. I drew the moment. The feeling. Lines like light. Like breath. Like silence stretching out and becoming song. And when I was done, I tore the page free and pinned it to the cabin door. A farewell. A beginning. I walked the path one last time, through the trees, past the garden and the broken fence, toward the dock. The sun was just beginning to fall behind the ridge, casting golden light across the water. And he was there. The frog. Perched once more on the dock's edge, still and sure. I knelt beside him. "Thank you," I whispered. He blinked. I laughed, soft, uncertain. "I don't know what you are. I don't know what I'll tell people. They wouldn't believe me anyway." Silence. But I believe now. In things that can't be explained. In things that hum instead of speak. In the in-between. The frog stayed very still. I reached out, not to touch, but to be present. He let me stay there like that, one last moment. Then, without a sound, he turned toward the water and leapt. This time, there was no glow. No ripple. Just the still lake, quiet in the golden hour, holding secrets like it always had. I walked away without looking back. And though I didn't hear it, I swear I felt it. The hum. Faint. Steady. Eternal. Like something singing not to be heard, but to be remembered.